History is not a story of gold and glory. It is a chronicle written in ink mixed with tears and blood. In the silent ruins of forgotten kingdoms, where the wind whispers through skeletal halls, lie the tales that time tries to erase. This is one such tale, a story of a throne built on ambition, a love poisoned by secrets, and a crown so heavy it crushed the very heads that wore it. We journey back to the fallen kingdom of Eldoria, to unearth the tragic saga of its last royal family, and to understand how their magnificent palace became a mausoleum of sorrow. This is the dark history of the blood-stained crown. Before the crown became a curse, it was a prize. Before the king became a monster, he was simply a man consumed by a terrifying hunger. His name was Valerius, a lord from a minor house, born with a fire in his eyes that saw beyond his station. He did not inherit his power, he carved it from the flesh of his rivals. With a silver tongue that could turn enemies into allies and a mind that saw conspiracy in every shadow, Valerius climbed the ladder of power. His ascent was a masterclass in ruthlessness, a series of calculated betrayals and convenient alliances that left a trail of broken promises and forgotten loyalties. When he finally seized the throne, it was not to the sound of joyous bells, but to the hushed, fearful whispers of a court that knew he had paid for his crown with more than just gold. King Valerius understood that power taken by force must be held by fear, and so the foundations of his kingdom were laid not with stone, but with the silent dread of all who served him. To legitimize his bloody ascent, King Valerius needed a queen of unimpeachable grace and lineage. He found her in Seraphina, a princess from a powerful, ancient kingdom across the sea. Her arrival in Eldoria was like the first day of spring after a long, brutal winter. With hair like spun moonlight and eyes that held the wisdom of generations, she was everything Valerius was not: gentle, beloved, and a symbol of peace. Their marriage was a political masterpiece, a union that calmed the restless nobles and gave the common folk a beacon of hope. Queen Seraphina moved through the cold stone halls of the palace like a living flame, bringing warmth to its dark corners. She tempered the king's harsh decrees, her soft voice a counterpoint to his iron will. For a time, it seemed her light could purify the shadows that clung to his soul. The people adored her, seeing in her the promise of a golden age. But the queen, in her quiet moments, could feel the chilling truth. She was not a wife, but a beautiful, gilded ornament, placed strategically to conceal the rot that was already setting deep into the heart of the throne. Then came the birth that should have solidified the dynasty forever, Princess Lyra. She was a perfect creation, a child with her mother's ethereal beauty, and it was hoped, none of her father's darkness. The kingdom celebrated for a month. Lyra's laughter echoed in the grand corridors, a sound so pure it seemed to momentarily silence the palace's ever-present whispers. King Valerius, for the first time, appeared to be a man softened by love. He would hold the small princess in his arms, showing her the kingdom from the highest balcony, promising her a future brighter than any star. Queen Seraphina watched these moments with a heart torn between hope and a deep, gnawing fear. Princess Lyra was the symbol of their union, the living embodiment of the kingdom's future. But in a court built on secrets, innocence is a fragile thing. She was a delicate flower growing in the shadow of a volcano, beautiful and vibrant, yet utterly oblivious to the eruption that was brewing just beneath the surface, an eruption that would one day consume everything she had ever known. The brief period of light brought by the princess's birth soon began to fade. The palace, for all its grandeur, was a labyrinth of secrets. Shadows grew longer in the corridors, and the whispers became more venomous. Jealous cousins, resentful lords, and ambitious ministers watched the royal family with envious eyes. They saw the king's affection for his daughter not as a strength, but as a weakness to be exploited. Conspiracies were hatched in hushed tones behind heavy tapestries. Rumors like poison began to seep into the court's bloodstream, questioning the queen's loyalty, the king's judgment, and the very future of the realm. Queen Seraphina felt the shift acutely. The smiles of the ladies-in-waiting no longer reached their eyes. The bows of the court lords seemed laced with mockery. The air grew thick with a tension that felt like a gathering storm. The king, too, sensed the change, but his paranoia twisted it, making him see enemies in loyal servants and traitors in his own family. The palace was no longer a home. It was a gilded cage, and its inhabitants were beginning to turn on one another. The joy King Valerius found in his daughter was fleeting, soon eclipsed by the insatiable hunger that had brought him to power. He saw his kingdom not as a home to be nurtured, but as a stepping stone to an empire. His ambition became a ravenous beast, demanding ever greater sacrifices. He levied punishing taxes on his people to fund endless wars, expanding his borders while hollowing out the heart of his own realm. The fields lay fallow as farmers were conscripted into his armies. The treasury, once filled by Queen Seraphina's careful management, was drained for steel and siege engines. When his advisors cautioned restraint, he saw only treason. One by one, those who dared to speak the truth found themselves in dungeons or at the executioner's block. King Valerius, once a calculating ruler, was becoming a tyrant, blinded by the dazzling reflection of his own power. The blood-stained crown he wore was no longer just a metaphor, it was a prophecy. He believed he was building a legacy, but he was merely digging a grave large enough for his entire kingdom, his family, and himself. As the king descended into tyranny, Queen Seraphina became a prisoner in her own life. The man she had married, the formidable ruler she had once respected, was gone, replaced by a paranoid despot who trusted no one. Her counsel was dismissed, her warnings ignored. She was confined to her chambers, a beautiful bird trapped in a cage of gold and marble. Her days were spent in suffocating silence, her nights filled with tears that she dared not shed in the light of day. She saw the fear in the eyes of her servants and the growing desperation of the common folk. Her deepest pain, however, was for her daughter. She tried to shield Princess Lyra from the encroaching darkness, creating a small, fragile world of love and stories within the palace walls. But she knew it could not last. The queen carried a secret, a burden of her own past that now felt like a ticking bomb. She was living on a knife's edge, praying that the king's madness would not uncover the one truth that could bring everything crashing down in a storm of blood and ruin. Princess Lyra grew up in this world of gilded misery. To her, the palace was a vast and lonely playground. She knew nothing of the starving populace or her father's bloody wars. Her world was one of tutors, silken dresses, and the sad, beautiful songs her mother, Queen Seraphina, would sing to her behind closed doors. Yet she was not entirely untouched by the chill. She learned to read the moods of the court, to recognize the difference between a genuine smile and a courtier's mask. She saw the fear her father inspired and felt the profound sadness that clung to her mother like a shroud. Princess Lyra was the kingdom's jewel, but she was also its most vulnerable piece in a deadly game of power. Factions within the court began to see her as a potential puppet, a future queen they could control. Her innocence was a liability, a flickering candle in a hurricane of political intrigue. She was the heart of the kingdom, but she was trapped between a tyrannical father and a despairing mother. Her fragile destiny being woven into a tapestry of tragedy she was too young to comprehend. The whisper that finally broke the kingdom began with a disgraced courtier seeking revenge. It was a venomous rumor, passed from ear to ear until it reached the king in his throne room, a secret the queen had guarded with her very soul. The secret was this: Princess Lyra, the golden heir, the king's pride, was not his daughter. Years ago, before her political marriage to Valerius, Queen Seraphina had been in love with a noble knight from her own land. Their union was brief and passionate, a memory she had buried deep within her heart. Lyra was the living proof of that lost love. When King Valerius heard the words, the world fractured around him. His paranoia, always simmering, boiled over into a volcanic rage. Every moment of tenderness he had shown his daughter, every proud glance, became a monument to his own deception. His love for the queen curdled into a black, murderous hatred. The secret did not just break his heart, it shattered his sanity. In his eyes, the queen was a traitor, the princess a living lie, and his entire reign a farce built upon a foundation of deceit. The king's wrath was swift and apocalyptic. He dragged Queen Seraphina from her chambers, accusing her of high treason and adultery before the entire horrified court. His private agony became public spectacle. This single act of cruelty was the spark that lit the pyre of rebellion. The people, already crushed under his tyrannical rule, saw the public humiliation of their beloved queen as the final injustice. Uprisings erupted in the capital. The city streets, once filled with market stalls and festivals, became a river of blood and fire as the royal guard clashed with the enraged citizenry. The rebellion was a chaotic, headless beast, fueled by years of pent-up rage. The palace, once an impenetrable fortress, became a besieged island in a sea of violence. The very lords who had once bowed to King Valerius now led armies against him, sensing his weakness. The throne, which he had fought so ruthlessly to gain, began to crumble beneath him, its foundations washed away by the blood of his own people. King Valerius denied Queen Seraphina a swift end. He wanted her to suffer, to serve as a warning to all who would defy him. He orchestrated a sham trial where she was condemned without evidence, her pleas for mercy falling on the deaf ears of a court paralyzed by fear. Her execution was a grim festival of cruelty held in the main square. She was led to the scaffold, stripped of her royal finery, but not her dignity. Her eyes scanned the crowd, not for a savior, but for a glimpse of her daughter, Princess Lyra, whom she had been denied seeing one last time. As the executioner's axe was raised, her final words were not a curse upon the king, but a whispered prayer for her child. Her last scream was drowned out by the roar of the mob, a sound that would haunt the kingdom for generations. The death of the queen was not just the end of a life. It was the death of hope, the final act that sealed the fate of a kingdom already condemned to darkness and despair. The queen's execution did not quell the rebellion. It turned it into a firestorm. The people, now seeing King Valerius as a demonic butcher, stormed the palace gates. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered wolf, his royal guards falling around him as the mob flooded the halls of power. They found him not in the throne room, but in the royal nursery, standing over Princess Lyra's empty crib, a man completely lost to madness. He was no longer a king, just a broken man in a dying kingdom. His downfall was not a noble defeat in battle, but a pathetic, brutal end. He was dragged from the palace, his crown knocked from his head to clatter on the cobblestones. The same people who once cheered his name now tore him limb from limb in the very square where he had executed his queen. His reign, which began in blood, ended in a symphony of brutal, poetic justice, his ambitions and his body torn to pieces by the fury he had unleashed. In the chaos of the king's fall and the storming of the palace, what became of Princess Lyra? Her fate is perhaps the most tragic chapter of this entire story. She was not killed. She was not rescued. She was simply forgotten. The leaders of the rebellion, now scrambling to form a new government, saw her as a dangerous symbol of the old regime. To execute a child would be to mirror the cruelty of the king they had just overthrown. But to let her live free was a risk they would not take. So they chose a third, crueler option. Under the cover of night, Princess Lyra was taken to the most remote, forgotten tower of the palace, the Spire of Silence. The door was barred, the key thrown into the deepest well, and her existence was erased from all official records. She was left with enough food and water to survive, but not to live. She became a ghost in her own home, a lost princess whose cries were heard by no one but the stone walls that served as her eternal tomb. The kingdom of Eldoria did not recover. It fractured, leaderless and scarred by civil war. The grand palace of King Valerius fell into ruin, its halls echoing only with the sound of the wind. The throne room became a haven for weeds and vermin, the blood-stained crown lost to the mud and decay. The new rulers, unable to unite the land, carved it into smaller, warring fiefdoms. The story of the tragic royal family became a cautionary tale, a dark legend whispered by grandparents to frighten children. They spoke of a mad king, a betrayed queen, and a lost princess who still haunted the highest tower, her ghost forever waiting for a mother who would never return. The golden age that Queen Seraphina had dreamed of, the powerful legacy King Valerius had killed for, all of it turned to dust. All that remained was silence, ruin, and the indelible stain of sorrow on the pages of a forgotten history. The tale of the blood-stained crown is a chilling reminder of the fragility of power and the corrosive nature of ambition. It teaches us that a throne built on fear will inevitably collapse into a tomb of bones. King Valerius, in his desperate pursuit of a legacy, achieved only infamy. Queen Seraphina, a beacon of light, was extinguished by the very darkness she sought to heal. And Princess Lyra, the symbol of innocence, became the ultimate victim, a life erased by the sins of her parents. Their story is a testament to the tragic truth that crowns do not confer greatness. They merely amplify what is